Have you ever noticed that the biggest battle in your life is not happening around you, but inside your own mind? Think about it for a moment. The moments when you wanted to start something important, but suddenly felt doubt. The times when you promised yourself you would wake up early, work harder, stay disciplined, and yet something inside you whispered, maybe tomorrow. That quiet voice feels small, but it has stopped more dreams than failure ever could. Most people believe the world is their biggest obstacle. They blame circumstances, other people, bad timing, or lack of opportunity. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. The real obstacle is the mind that constantly tries to protect comfort, avoid risk, and escape pressure. Your mind is powerful, incredibly powerful. But if it is not trained, it becomes your greatest enemy. Every day, thousands of thoughts move through your head. Some push you forward, many pull you back. One moment you feel confident. The next moment doubt appears, then fear, then hesitation, and before you realize it, the energy you had disappears. This is why so many people stay stuck, not because they lack ability, not because they lack intelligence, but because they never learn how to control the battlefield inside their own head. Centuries ago in Japan, warriors faced a brutal reality. Their survival depended not only on their physical strength, but on their mental control. A moment of hesitation could mean defeat. A single doubt could cost them everything. So they trained their minds with the same intensity they used to train their bodies. They understood something modern society has almost forgotten. The mind cannot simply be trusted. It must be trained, disciplined, and shaped with intention. One old Japanese master named Takeshi explained this idea in a way that shocked many of his students. He said the human mind is like a wild horse. If you let it run wherever it wants, it will drag you into chaos. It will chase comfort, avoid difficulty, and constantly search for the easiest path. But if you learn to control that horse, if you train it patiently and firmly, it can carry you farther than you ever imagined. Most people today do the opposite. They wake up and immediately follow their feelings. If they feel tired, they rest longer. If they feel distracted, they grab their phone. If they feel uncertain, they postpone their goals. Little by little, the mind becomes the master, and the person becomes the follower. But what if that could change? What if the thoughts that limit you are not actually in control? What if the fear that stops you is just noise? Takeshi believed there was a technique so powerful, so uncomfortable, that many people avoided it completely. A technique that could silence hesitation, strengthen discipline, and give a person complete authority over their own mind. It was not about motivation. It was not about positive thinking. It was about control. And once you understand how this technique works, something inside you begins to shift. The voice that once controlled your actions begins to lose its authority. The hesitation that once stopped you begins to weaken. By the end of this journey, you may realize something most people never discover in their entire lives. Your thoughts are not your master. They are only suggestions. And the moment you stop obeying every thought that enters your mind is the moment your real power begins. Once that realization begins to settle inside you, something important starts to happen. The invisible chains that once controlled your actions begin to loosen. For the first time, you start to notice something most people never see. Your thoughts are constantly speaking, constantly reacting, constantly predicting. But just because they appear does not mean they deserve obedience. The mind is loud. It produces fear before you even try. It predicts failure before you begin. It reminds you of past mistakes as if they define your future. And if you are not aware of what is happening, you start believing every single word it says. But the ancient discipline Takeshi spoke about begins with a simple shift in awareness. You are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. This may sound small, but it changes everything. Most people live as if their thoughts and their identity are the same thing. When doubt appears, they say, I can't do this. When fear appears, they say, I'm not ready. When anxiety appears, they say, something must be wrong, but look closer. Those are not facts. Those are just thoughts passing through the mind. Imagine standing beside a fast-moving river. The water never stops flowing. It moves constantly, carrying leaves, branches, and debris along with it. Thoughts work the same way. They appear, they move, and if you grab them, they pull you with them. Most people jump directly into that river. They get dragged by every emotion, every worry, every temporary fear. Their entire direction changes based on whatever thought appears in that moment. But the discipline taught by Takeshi requires something different. Instead of jumping into the river, you step back and watch it. You begin observing the mind rather than becoming controlled by it. When doubt appears, you don't immediately accept it as truth. You notice it, you recognize it, you watch it move through your awareness. Suddenly the thought loses some of its authority. The same happens with fear. Fear still appears, that is natural. The brain is designed to detect danger, but instead of reacting instantly, you pause. You see the emotion rise, and instead of becoming it, you observe it. That small distance between you and your thoughts is where real power begins. Because once you realize that thoughts are simply signals, you gain something most people never develop: choice. You begin to understand that the mind often exaggerates. It predicts problems that never happen. It creates stories about failure that have no evidence. It whispers limitations that are not real. The mind is trying to protect you from discomfort. But in doing so, it often blocks growth. Every great challenge in life triggers resistance in the mind. It tries to convince you that stopping is safer, that waiting is smarter, that avoiding difficulty is the better option. And if you never question that voice, it slowly becomes the ruler of your life. But when you step back and observe your thoughts, you start breaking that pattern. You see fear without surrendering to it. You hear doubt without obeying it. You feel hesitation without letting it decide your next move. This awareness creates mental space, and inside that space, something powerful emerges. You begin to act based on intention instead of emotion. You begin to move forward even when the mind is uncomfortable. You begin to recognize that the voice in your head is not the commander of your life. You are. That is the moment the internal battle starts to shift in your favor. The moment you realize that you are the observer of your thoughts, something inside you begins to shift. The noise in your head no longer feels like absolute truth. It starts to feel like background chatter, but awareness alone is not enough. Awareness opens the door, yet control requires something stronger. The technique Takeshi spoke about was not passive. It was not about simply watching the mind forever. It was about taking authority over it. Most people spend their lives negotiating with their own minds. They wait for the perfect feeling before they act. They ask themselves if they feel ready. They ask themselves if motivation has arrived. And if the answer is no, they delay action. But the mind loves delay. Delay protects comfort. Delay protects safety. Delay protects the familiar. And slowly that delay becomes a habit. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into years. The dreams remain the same, but the actions never begin. Takeshi believed this was the greatest trap of the human mind. The mind wants to be consulted. It wants to be asked for permission. But the more you ask for permission, the more power you give it. True mental control begins the moment you stop negotiating. The ancient discipline was based on something simple but incredibly powerful: commanding the mind. Instead of asking yourself whether you feel ready, you give a clear instruction. Move, start. Continue, finish. These words may sound simple, but the brain responds to clarity. When language becomes decisive, hesitation loses its grip. Most people speak to themselves with uncertainty. They say things like, maybe I should begin. They say, I will try later. They say, I hope I can do this. Every one of those phrases carries doubt. And the mind responds to that doubt by slowing down action. But when the instruction becomes direct, something changes inside the brain. Start. There is no debate in that word. Continue. There is no escape in that word. Finish. There is no hesitation in that word. The body understands commands. The nervous system reacts to certainty. The more decisive the language becomes, the faster action follows. This is why elite performers in every field rely on strict internal commands. They do not wait for emotions to cooperate. They move first and the emotions follow. The mind may protest, it may complain, it may argue, but the command remains the same: move. And when action begins, something surprising happens. The resistance that felt so strong begins to weaken. The task that felt impossible begins to feel manageable. The fear that felt overwhelming begins to shrink. Because the mind is strongest before action begins. Once momentum starts, its influence decreases. This is the hidden secret behind discipline. Discipline is not about feeling powerful. Discipline is about acting before the mind convinces you to stop. Takeshi often warned that hesitation is the mind's favorite weapon. It stretches the moment between decision and action. It fills that space with doubt, fear, and endless questions. But when you close that gap, when decision instantly leads to movement, the mind loses its ability to interfere. Action becomes faster. Confidence begins to grow, and slowly a new pattern forms inside your brain. The mind begins to learn that your commands are final, not suggestions, not requests, commands. And once the mind learns that you are serious, something extraordinary begins to happen. It stops fighting as much. It starts following. When the mind begins to understand that your commands are no longer negotiable, a new kind of strength starts to form inside you. It is quiet at first, almost unnoticeable. But with every action you take despite resistance, that strength grows deeper. Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. The mind does not become disciplined through comfort. It becomes disciplined through pressure. Every time you choose the easy path, the mind learns something. It learns that discomfort should be avoided. It learns that effort is optional. It learns that quitting is acceptable. And once that lesson is repeated enough times, the mind begins to expect comfort as a requirement for action. The moment difficulty appears, it pushes you to stop. But the ancient discipline Takeshi spoke about was built on a completely different philosophy. The mind must be trained in discomfort. Not extreme suffering, not punishment, but controlled challenges that force the mind to face resistance and continue anyway. Discomfort reveals the true behavior of your mind. The moment things become difficult, the mind begins speaking louder. It creates excuses. It exaggerates the pain. It predicts failure before the effort is even complete. It says you are too tired. It says you have already done enough. It says there is always another day. But when you stay inside the discomfort instead of escaping it, something powerful begins to happen. You start discovering that the mind exaggerates far more than it tells the truth. The fatigue feels unbearable at first, but then it settles. The resistance feels overwhelming at first, but then it weakens. The task feels impossible at first, but then it becomes manageable. Your brain begins learning a new lesson. Difficulty does not mean danger. Effort does not mean collapse. Pressure does not mean stop. And with every moment you remain inside that discomfort, your mental threshold expands. This is why disciplined people appear calm when others panic. They are not stronger by birth. They are stronger by training. Their minds have been exposed to pressure again and again until pressure no longer feels threatening. When challenges appear, their brain recognizes the situation. It has experienced discomfort before, and it knows it can survive it. But when the mind has been protected from difficulty for too long, even small problems begin to feel overwhelming. Minor stress feels unbearable. Simple obstacles feel impossible. This is the silent damage of constant comfort. It shrinks your mental endurance. Takeshi believed that every person who wanted control over their mind needed daily encounters with discomfort. Not to prove toughness to others, but to teach the mind an important truth. You are stronger than the voice telling you to stop. Each moment you continue despite resistance becomes evidence. Evidence that you are capable. Evidence that effort does not break you. Evidence that pressure can be handled. And slowly, the relationship with your mind begins to change. The same voice that once demanded comfort begins to quiet down. The complaints become weaker. The fear becomes less convincing. Because the mind now understands something it did not understand before. You are willing to move forward even when things are difficult. That realization changes the internal balance of power. The mind begins to recognize that its resistance no longer controls your direction. And when the mind loses that control, something extraordinary begins to emerge inside you. Resilience, a mental toughness that does not disappear when life becomes hard. A stability that remains even when emotions rise and fall. And that resilience is the foundation of an unbreakable mind. And when resilience begins to take root inside you, something remarkable starts to unfold. The mind that once controlled your choices slowly begins to lose its authority. The emotions that once dictated your direction no longer feel like rulers. They become signals, temporary waves passing through your awareness. Fear may still appear, but it no longer stops you. Doubt may still whisper, but it no longer decides your path. Fatigue may still visit, but it no longer has the power to shut you down. Something stronger now exists within you. A decision. Most people build their lives on emotion. When they feel motivated, they act. When motivation fades, their progress disappears with it. Their direction changes depending on how they feel in the moment. But an unbreakable mind is built differently. It is built on decisions that remain firm even when emotions shift. A decision is powerful because it removes negotiation. When you decide who you are going to be, the mind slowly adjusts to that identity. At first, it resists. It questions the new standard. It tries to pull you back into old patterns. But every time you act in alignment with your decision, the brain begins rewriting the story it tells about you. The human mind constantly builds identity from repeated behavior. If you repeatedly stop when things feel uncomfortable, the mind builds the identity of someone who avoids pressure. If you repeatedly delay difficult work, the mind builds the identity of someone who procrastinates. And once identity forms, behavior begins to follow it automatically. But something powerful happens when your actions begin proving a new truth. When you move forward despite doubt, despite resistance, despite fear, you start building evidence. Evidence that you are disciplined. Evidence that you finish what you start. Evidence that you move forward even when the mind tries to stop you. That evidence slowly reshapes the way you see yourself. You stop thinking of discipline as something you are trying to achieve. You begin to see it as something you already possess. And when identity shifts, everything changes. Because the brain always tries to remain consistent with identity. When someone believes they are strong, they behave in ways that confirm that belief. When someone believes they are resilient, they naturally choose actions that reinforce that image. This is why mastering your mind creates such a powerful transformation. It is not just about controlling thoughts. It is about rewriting the identity that controls your actions. You stop seeing challenges as threats. You start seeing them as opportunities to reinforce who you have become. You stop asking whether something is easy or difficult. You begin asking whether it aligns with the person you have decided to be. And when that shift happens, discipline stops feeling like a struggle. It becomes a standard. You begin to operate with a level of focus that most people never experience. The endless internal debates disappear. The hesitation between intention and action becomes smaller and smaller. Energy that was once wasted on doubt becomes available for progress. The mind becomes quieter, clearer, stronger. You no longer wait for the perfect mood to begin. You no longer depend on motivation to carry you forward. You move because you decided to move. You continue because you decided to continue. And the world begins to respond differently to someone who lives with that level of internal authority. Because when the mind no longer controls you, there is very little left that can stop you. At that point, the real question is no longer whether you are capable of controlling your mind. The real question becomes something deeper. What will you do with that power once it truly belongs to you? When that power truly begins to belong to you, life starts to feel different. Not easier, but clearer. The chaos that once filled your mind slowly fades, replaced by a quiet sense of direction. You begin to notice something most people never experience, the ability to act without being dragged backward by your own thoughts. For most of their lives, people are pulled in every direction by emotion. One moment they feel inspired, the next moment they feel uncertain. They start with excitement, but the moment resistance appears, their energy collapses. Their progress rises and falls like waves in the ocean. But an unbreakable mind does not rise and fall with emotion. It moves with purpose. Purpose is stronger than mood. Purpose survives discomfort. Purpose continues even when enthusiasm disappears. And once you learn to operate from purpose rather than feeling, your life begins to move with a different kind of force. The truth is simple. Your mind was never meant to be your master. It was meant to be your tool. A powerful tool, but still a tool. When a tool begins controlling the one holding it, everything falls into disorder. The same thing happens when the mind takes control of the person who should be directing it. Every fear becomes a command. Every doubt becomes a barrier. Every distraction becomes a trap. But once control returns to you, the relationship changes completely. Thoughts still appear, emotions still rise, but they no longer dictate your behavior. They become information, not instructions. You begin to notice fear and move anyway. You begin to notice doubt and continue anyway. You begin to notice discomfort and keep going anyway. And with every step forward, the authority inside you grows stronger. Something powerful starts forming in your character. A quiet confidence that does not need validation. A discipline that does not depend on motivation. A focus that remains steady even when the world becomes noisy. This is the true meaning of mastering the mind. It is not about eliminating negative thoughts. It is about becoming stronger than them. Because the mind will always try to protect comfort. It will always look for easier paths. That instinct is part of being human, but mastery begins when you no longer obey that instinct blindly. You begin choosing growth over comfort, effort over ease, discipline over impulse. At first, these choices require effort. The mind resists the new standard. It tries to pull you back into familiar habits. But the more consistently you hold your ground, the more the mind begins to adapt. Eventually, something incredible happens. The same mind that once resisted discipline begins supporting it. The same voice that once created excuses begins reminding you of your standards. The internal resistance that once slowed you down becomes internal momentum. Your mind starts working for you instead of against you. And when that shift happens, progress accelerates, focus sharpens, goals that once seemed distant begin moving closer. Not because the world suddenly became easier, but because you stopped fighting yourself. That is the hidden secret behind every person who achieves extraordinary things. Their greatest victory was never external, it was internal. They learned to control the battlefield inside their own mind. And the moment you truly understand that power, the way you approach life changes forever. Because the limits that once felt real start to disappear. The excuses that once felt convincing start to sound weak. And the voice that once told you to stop begins to fade into the background, leaving only one voice with real authority. Yours.